Welcome to Getting Personal, a monthly podcast diving deep into the stories of the heartbeat of HR. Brought to you by Compt, a global lifestyle benefits platform where companies empower employees with benefits and rewards they'll use and appreciate, whoever and wherever they are in life.
Joining me today is Theresa Fesinstine, founder of peoplepower.ai. She's been in HR for over 24 years and now teaches teams how to use AI in ways that are ethical, accessible, and, believe it or not, actually useful. If you followed her on LinkedIn at all, and you should, you'd know she has an awesome and big personality, and she's all about keeping work human, which relatable. Welcome, Theresa.
Thank you so much for having me. What a wonderful entree. I feel like I'm going to steal that and give it to everybody else to use.
Do it. I am a firm believer in sharing the knowledge. It's like sharing the wealth.
Love it. Samesies all over the place.
Amazing. So I know that, I mean, we could talk about anything and you really light up. But I know that you have a distinct spark when you talk about learning and possibility, and not just AI. When we were preparing for this, you took me back to the good old days of 1997, pre Y2K. So tell me about that time in your career. I know that it started in L&D. So take me back and tell me about, I guess, maybe even your first memory, if it is in your brain somewhere, of like, oh, this is the best job in the world. This is what I'm going to do.
So it's so funny. I came into L&D in a really odd way. Even when I was first kind of my boss at the time, Julia Park, even when she first proposed the idea to me, I just thought to myself, like, I'm an incredibly shy person. I grew up quite bullied. I was, my dream was to be like what now became Mad Men and pitch advertising opportunities and things like that. And so when she proposed that I start doing learning and development and training, I worked for an assisted living company, which, by the way, I was like 24 years old and going out and basically eventually trying to teach these 58, 60-year-old individuals who just wanted to love on old people how to be salespeople. So it was this really very odd situation. And she asked if I would like to kind of become a trainer. And my initial response was absolutely not. And then she said, "I'd really like for you to do this." And I was like, "I'm a people pleaser." So she
Oh,
sent me
yeah.
off to a train the trainer program. And I have to admit, my first few attempts at training were pretty terrifying. I know the first time before my first ever training session, I remember it like it was yesterday, and my mom still talks about it actually, that I did a few things. I recorded myself so that I could play it while I slept, so that it would possibly all of this stuff that I was fighting to memorize, 3 days worth of content, I was fighting to memorize, not realizing at the time that that doesn't really work for an ADHD brain, but that was the approach that I thought to take because I wanted to be so perfect at it. And I think it took me a few times of going through those exercises and kind of finding my own path to how I could really have an impact in the classroom or at an organization. And it probably took me 2 years of doing it before I really thought, this is the best damn job ever. Like,
Mm.
you get to have an impact on people's careers without it being so hardly focused in on like the promotion track or the performance track or this idea that you had an opportunity or I had an opportunity to help employees fulfill the role that they were in a way that was really powerful. And I got so lucky in I did that job for a while in assisted living. And that role became a bit heavy for me, at 25 years old, dealing with life and death from an
Yeah.
assisted living perspective was a bit tough. And so I had an opportunity. I moved to New York. I worked for one of the largest media companies in the world, News Corp. Did that for about 15 years, but started there in L&D as well. And I
Mm.
think that really training young talent that was just coming in fresh for a sales program was just like chef's kiss. It was so great. And I've all my whole career thought that L&D was the best job ever. And I've said that to many people who either didn't want to be in L&D. I'm like, you're missing something. For those younger team members that joined my team and just had true talent. It really is the best job in the world.
I love to hear that, especially since you went into it maybe begrudgingly
Mhm.
and now can look back on it with fondness. Although L&D is not completely gone from your career; it's just shifted. And I
Oh
know,
my gosh.
yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no,
I was just gonna say, like, the reason and the only reason I shifted away from it was because I just had no stability. In that organization, we had many different outer offices. I was traveling all the time
mm,
and really wanted to have a little bit of stability. And I also wanted to manage others. And so the path to do that was going back into kind of an HR generalist role. And then for the rest of my career up until 3 years ago now, I was doing generalist HR, became a VP of HR, CHRO, head of HR, and did that until 2022 when I eventually left to start my own business.
I know that you have also mentioned that COVID was a huge turning point for you, which I guess that takes us 2 years back from when you decided to leave HR officially. Or I don't even know if it's, do you ever leave HR? Not
Oh, I wouldn't
really.
say I've left. I'd say I pivoted.
Yeah.
I've joined a new career, HR adjacent.
Right. That makes sense. So tell me about that turning point then, because I imagine this was professional. It's definitely personal. I mean, that relates to everyone. How did you avoid that during that time? It was something that impacted all of us professionally and personally. And I know that you were talking about like being in Slack channels and kind of crowdsourcing how everyone else was getting through it.
Oh my gosh, Lauren. I would say that and without question that I would say that COVID was the most traumatic period of my career. And I think a lot of other HR leaders are still here at the end of 2025 still experiencing kind of undiscussed trauma,
Hmm.
psychological challenges. So COVID for me, I think so many of us that came up in my age of HR and my professional timing, if you will, we had so many kind of policies and compliances drilled into us that when COVID came along and there was so much healthcare information being shared and decisions being made around people's health, it was like so many of us really held that very tightly. Like
Yeah.
it's our burden to carry because it related to HIPAA and related to healthcare. And so I think so many of us were found ourselves in situations, not just HR, but generally, but when it came to employment and safety and the mental strain that everybody was under, so much of that fell on us. And I admit today that I probably took on a lot more because of those perceptions of restriction. Like, I can't tell you who's sick, I can't tell you who's this. And so, but I know, and we carry that weight. COVID also was such a time for so many of our employees that they were dealing with their own. I had one employee that lost, I want to say, 12 of his family members in the first few months, 2 months of
Holy cow.
March, April, May of 2020. Um, and so carrying that, as a company who always, I've always worked for companies where I felt it was important to create really collegial, connected environments. And so something that we would have done in the past where it was sharing birth announcements, sharing,
Mm,
people who lost loved ones became this like, okay, we just can't do that anymore. And like it's becoming a harm to the employees. That sat heavy on us. Employees that were sick, suicidal. There was a lot of really, really rough things happening, and that caused a lot of mental trauma. And I think for me, there was there was no space initially that felt like a repository where we could go and just like, how are you dealing with this? This just came out here. What is your company doing? And I believe that's really the rise of what we see today in the sense of community engagement, Slack channel engagement. Companies, Pops United was a whole
mm.
company, but Pops United itself became a home base. I had many relationships formulate out of there. Troop HR developed at kind of really grew at that time. I'm now an advisor and supporter, and very proud member of Troop. Culture First, that started growing out of a philanthropic effort through Culture Amp, really to bring creating a better world of work through community. And so volunteered there as a community lead. And there were just these silos of like, we need connection.
Yeah.
And it was a research project to find them because I think the traditional sources that we would have liked to look to, the SHRMs and, whatever, just were not offering that same, like, we needed resource, we needed information. And I think a lot of that is people are feeling that same way now about AI. Like, we need resources to understand what we're dealing with. It's very different. It's something we've never experienced. How do we do this?
Yeah. You know what's interesting is when I guess joined the bubble that is HR some 4 years ago now. But in my seat in HR tech, I also joined these communities because I'm like, first I'm gonna lurk.
Sure.
But also I need to learn as much as I can. I need to understand our buyer. I need to understand just what we're talking about, how we're talking about it, what matters to you.
Yeah.
And through it, I've discovered so many different kinds of, I mean, amazing connections, first of all, but just understanding and education. There's so many different topics. I mean, it spans beyond like how do you phrase this in a policy? And who are you going to for these benefits? And what brokers do you recommend? And I have also noticed, especially in the past year, the I was going to say uptick, but it's really just like up and to the right of people asking about AI. There's so much.
Yeah. I think that what's been interesting for me is and if you've heard me before, you've heard me say this, like, I really view the journey of AI learning and adoption as sort of like a beachhead
Mm,
where I started my experience with generative AI as we know it now, really started December 5th of 22. I know the day. I'd left
happy
corporate.
anniversary.
Thank you, right? And just like 10 days later, I left my corporate world. I actually resigned January of 22 and officially left July of 22. So I gave 6 months notice because I just knew I needed a change. I
Yeah.
really I was burned out, um, and needed to get out, if you will. And so I started a culture consulting business, had no real idea on how to do that. I think it was an outreach for a safety net or like a lifesaver to like start
Hmm.
a company. And I honestly think that a lot of HR people have been doing that over the past 3 years, kind of leaving, needing a safety net, starting a business without really thinking about how to do that. And so I spent the first like 4.5 months. Great, a few personal referrals were fantastic, focusing on that work, and then as those projects started to die down, it was like, "Okay, what happens now?" And I realized, like, I had no idea about starting a business, and serendipitously, I guess it was November 30th of 22, ChatGPT launched, and on
Mm,
December 5th, a good friend texted me and said, "Hey, have you tried this?" And I was like, I've never heard of that, I don't know what that is." And so, starting December 5th, for the next 2 months, I was on ChatGPT all day, every day, trying to write business plans and like, how am I going to grow this role? And the more I experienced it and the more I started experimenting with it, the more excited I got. And I would start to talk with former colleagues or people in these now communities that I was a part of and saying like, "How are you using this?" And really at that point, it was like crickets. And so the way I've analogized that is to say they were still in the seagrass. Like I was
yeah.
coming down, I was dipping toes, they were still in the seagrass. And 23, in fact, was still very much that way, that like a lot of people really were not exploring.
Yep.
And then by 24, we had a lot more people on the beach, a lot more in the water. 25 has been a real influx of people coming down, getting their feet wet and starting to get into the deep end. And I'm so excited about what 26 has to bring. But I think for me, it was this unlock of okay, this is going to be game changing for business. If I were still back at like the things that I thought of truly, Lauren, were if I were back at Sage, the company I was working with today, and had to write a policy on, vaccination, wearing masks, religious beliefs, all these like conversations where I thought, oh my God, I don't know how to say this. My stress level would have been exponentially lower. And then
Yeah.
the more I learned about it, I started kind of getting in really curious and engaged in different companies that work through AI and are AI first, and became an advisor to a few because they were really looking for the human people side of things. I've I just am so much an advocate of building understanding and learning so that you can make a choice as to what you choose not to use or use. But
Right.
the curiosity is certainly there.
What do you think was the hesitancy for HR people getting on board with AI? Because I've noticed a little bit of that there. I don't know if it's policy based or we don't know, or I have 18 million other jobs. Like I don't have time for this.
Yeah.
And HR has seen so many different versions of itself, different eras. I mean, the HR of the aughts, the 2010s, the 2020 and like and even now because so much has accelerated since 2025. Like you can't even compare
Yeah.
what people are being asked to do now versus then and how they can put all of these things on their plate.
I what I think about is the experience I had. I wouldn't say that in truth the changes in the job have come more primarily around the directive or need to be more analytical.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you go back to the transition of, the early roles of HR really were about safety. They were about protecting employees, even though that may not be the perception that people have. It
Right.
really was about employee rights and employee making sure that people weren't injured on the job. And if they were, that they were compensated for that and that there was fair treatment. And I think that and in a lot of cases, I have a funny story. When I moved from News Corporation, I eventually took this role at Sage. I the former HR type roles they had was just payroll. And so when I started, the CFO kept saying like, "Oh, we have a new payroll person." And I was like, "I've never done payroll in my life, Boris. Please stop saying that." Like HR has expanded beyond payroll.
Yep.
And so I the truth is that I am very lucky. I have always, from the time I moved to work at News Corp, News America Marketing, the HR lead always sat at the C-suite table.
Hmm.
We're always invited in. We're always very well respected for opinion, perspective, and best practices. So my early HR learnings came from a place of being already at the table, not needing to necessarily validate our role in order to get there. But I do think that there's been some shifts around overarching, kind of more traditionally thought of HR teams, payroll, compliance, leave of absences, things like that, and how there is push for them to quote unquote understand the business,
Yeah.
understand business talk. And so there's that change. There's also the change of, as I mentioned before, this analytical drive. Like I know I don't even know what year it was, 2016, 2017, 2018. I was at General Assembly taking the Tableau classes and the analytics classes, trying to just better understand what that even meant. I had a gentleman that really unlocked some ideas for me around what data could do in terms of business modeling, and that was really insightful, which is why I took those classes. But I think where HR leaders have struggled is that um, what you mentioned, number one, is just the volume of work that we cover off on.
Hmm.
Um, and it's not to say that other departments and functions don't have to have a lot of work that they have to do. But what you have to understand about HR is the dynamics of our role span everything from payroll to compliance, but also employee satisfaction employee engagement, performance, when somebody's not doing well, when somebody has a family issue, when somebody, is we need to this department is completely over, wrapping itself and doing a new thing. We've got to understand all of that. And it's not to say that it's an impossible task. I mean, HR leaders are crushing it every single day. Where AI comes in, to get back to your original question, I don't think it's just AR. I think HR. I think change is difficult for many people. There was
Mhm.
a lot of terrible, in my opinion, news coverage around what AI was about. So I still see people using this quote, and it drives me crazy. Like, AI won't take your job, but somebody who knows AI was going to take your job. Like, that fear mongering originated, I think, through IBM. I could be wrong. Around that kind of phraseology. And then you started to see like what agentic could do. And so I think the
Mhm.
conversation has been confusing.
Yeah.
And some leaders are saying we need to be all in on AI when teams don't even understand what that possibly could mean. And there hasn't been a ton of support to say, okay, we're going to give you the time over the next 4 months or 5 months to be trained on this as a tool that can help aid you in your work. It's a lot of catch as catch can, which is why I started my business, People Power AI, to help in whatever way I can HR leaders better understand the functionality of these tools in practical daily ways, as opposed to the theory or the fear factor or the how the sausage is made. Like, HR leaders, when I was one, I don't care how I mean, this sounds terrible. I don't care how it works. I just need it to work
Oh,
so
yeah.
that I can move on to other things, you know?
Right. Because you only have so much time. You only have so
Exactly.
much in tech bandwidth. Like, you only have so much brain space to I mean, like, AI is a tool. To adopt a new tool, it takes time. There's a learning curve there. So I can understand the um, hesitancy, or even just the putting it on the back burner that tends to happen.
Yeah.
Of, well, I know that I have to do all of these other things first, and I just don't have time to learn how this could take me from like it's nice and it's helpful to, like, oh, this can really power what I'm doing, and this could effectively restructure or significantly just impact, make quicker, improve all aspects of my job effectively.
Mhm. Yeah, and from my perspective, many team members were trying to figure out where they should start looking for information, for policy, for expectations, for learning. And a lot of those teams were waiting for tech to answer those questions. This was the one of the first workshops I did for Mazda North America. It was a 60 plus person HR team. This was back in 23, so they were really early in their learning journey. Very smart HR leadership bringing me in that soon. And but when I asked the question of the group, what is being discussed organizationally around AI? No response, nothing. And when I said, "What are we waiting for?" They said, "Well, I think we're waiting for IT." Like, we're waiting for tech because it's perceived as a technical part of the business. In the
Right.
same way, though, I have a lot of empathy for tech teams because, to be truthful, when COVID happened, going back to the old COVID story, when COVID happened, there was total expectation that HR would just know how to handle this pandemic that none of us had ever experienced before, right?
Sure.
And so tech teams were in the same position to have this expectation on them, when really, and I have this quote in all of my workshops, is, AI is not a tech issue. It's a human change management personal issue, and we need to deal with it as such. But there was a lot of who owns it? Why would
Yeah.
HR own it? We're not technical. And that's where a lot of that confusion early on, I think, started. And so I still see this to this day, Lauren, that HR leaders are, kind of waiting to be told, where I really have a forward leaning, ask the questions, be the one to start the conversation. Start it with, what is our position on AI? What tools have you even tried? even starting with just a learning tool, like a learning tour around your company to say, hey, employees, without risk of fear, don't be afraid. We know this is happening. We want to understand the how so that we can build a program and some guidelines around safety and your own and the companies without it feeling like this restrictive, don't do this, fear mongering around the work that most of us do that doesn't actually entail a ton of PII or IP that hasn't been published. Like there's just a lot of work that can be done across teams, not just HR, but across teams that AI can help with ideation, with strategy, and now just, creating the dashboards that took 2 months to put together or the board review that can be done in, with the right inputs and the right context, that can be done in a matter of minutes. It just doesn't need to take as long. You just need to know how to tame the beast, if you will.
Right. I'm always saying like I have to do whatever the robots need. I need to please the robot overlords.
What is
Uh
the robot asking me today?
yes. Um so instead of one thing that you mentioned that stuck with me in that is the idea of HR being proactive in this instead of waiting for a directive, which happens a lot from some CEO that gets this idea of, whoa, we should be future forward. And I heard about AI. I don't know what it means. Good luck.
Yeah.
Um, so where should HR even start? If they want to, geez, I don't know. Maybe they don't, maybe the baseline is they don't know anything about this at all. So it starts
Mhm.
with the AI literacy before you can, I guess, maybe use the tool yourself, then instruct others on how to use it, crowdsource how your employees are using it, as you mentioned.
Yeah, you know, for me, it starts with curiosity. The idea that there's this tool out there that I've heard a little bit about, but I also would warn against a sort of free for all, everybody test and try and see what comes out the other end. It's just probably, uh, you know, like a lot of other animals, it's not going to be pretty. And so I would say, for your listeners, following somebody like myself, people who are in HR that are having the conversation, that are curious, exploring, I've had the luxury over the past 3 years of having the time to build deep understanding and
Hmm.
experimentation. A lot of what I see out on the road or at conferences or with companies is this curiosity around the art of what's possible. And so finding, experiments, not being afraid to try something that I put in a LinkedIn post because I'm going to give you the safety in order to do it. Uh I do think conversation, and I don't mean to fall back on an old solution, but I do think starting the conversation and posting walking around your office for an hour or holding an open, Q&A session on Zoom with a remote team to say, let's just share ways that we've been doing it and then vet whether those ways are safe. Great example. I was at a conference maybe 6 months ago, and this is a group that puts this conference on. Deeply respect, uh, journalistic organization. I really, really appreciate the work they do. They had a few guest speakers, CHROs, that were up on the dais talking about how they use AI. And one of the leaders commented about how she thinks her favorite use is by taking survey results and plugging them into ChatGPT and getting employee engagement responses. Now, that definitely seems faster and easier. Having done it myself for years, that process can take months, honestly, to go through a large organization's commentary questions from an engagement survey. But the challenge with plugging that kind of thing into a tool like ChatGPT, she did not have an enterprise level account, is that you can't be sure where the data points are actually coming from, right?
Right.
OpenAI is a black box, ChatGPT is a black box system. What that means is there are hidden layers to how responses are developed, whether it's through the data that you provide the training model that already has existing data on engagement surveys, or the internet, which also has information on engagement surveys. And so this confluence of data that you cannot actually backtrack and verify is a very strong reason not to use a tool like ChatGPT for employee engagement surveys, even if it feels so much faster and easier and accurate.
Right.
There are other tools that you could use, but that's where I start to feel a little hesitant when companies, there were a few that were out recently that said, "Oh, we're gonna become AI first, and we're giving everybody access to whatever tools they want, and just go out and explore and play." And it's like, you could do that, but there's so much risk in that. There are ways to learn, you know, experts like myself who've spent time, energy, effort to get certified to learn these tools and then eventually teach these to others. And so finding somebody that you feel is trustworthy, that has some expertise, that can give you some guidance, is a great place to start. And heck, you could even ask ChatGPT, who are the experts in your functional domain that could be of assistance.
Yeah, absolutely. I also, just based on experience, recommend even asking like your marketing team. There's a good chance that the content creators at your company have been dabbling with it and
Mhm.
trying to figure out how to make this work. And maybe even creating models within it. I mean, I spend day in and day out seemingly seasoning my chat GPT and
Mhm.
trying to figure out how to make it work better for me. Um,
Yeah.
and even then, go back to the old Google it if you don't want to chat GPT it.
Yeah, but my position is this, I don't disagree with you. I think it's the idea of sharing across functions,
Yeah.
but I do think that, a marketing person might really have a great scope on how to get more creative outputs,
Oh, yeah.
but they may not know how am I strategically building you know, a management philosophy or a succession planning strategy across the organization. And a lot of
Yep.
HR leaders need to understand that that's a possibility. That when you think about the big projects every year, we're at a perfect time to talk about it. Like, what are your big projects for 26?
Hmm.
You could probably be 60 to 70, maybe even 80% of the way there, leveraging a
Yeah.
tool in the right way versus the heavy lift. I was having a conversation with somebody when I have a cohort program, and one of my members of my cohort, we were having a one-on-one, and I was asking him a project that he's working on, and he was doing, I literally have it right here, the notes, that he was working on essentially building out a skill structure, competency structure within his organization that aligned with different titles. And so I asked him how he was going about that. And he's like, "Well, I went to the HRES system and I was pulling each of them." Like, all of that stuff can be done so much faster, but our brain defaults to the way we used to do it. And so to me, if there's one little trick that I think helps people, is take a sticky note and just put, "Could AI help with this?" or "How could AI help with this?" on your
Mm-hmm.
desk as you go in to do that standard work. And just, I think, having that thought of, okay, if I go through the first 10 steps of this process, how much is manual, and could that
Right.
manual be turned automated? Not that it should take on everything. I'm a huge human in the loop. My phrase is people first, AI forward.
Yeah.
Um, But giving and I'm just generally not like, I don't understand why anybody Googles anything anymore. Perplexity is a much more intelligent, uh, stronger performer. The way I view Google is like taking you to the stacks in the library. It's like, that's a lot of time and effort to go through the stacks. But Perplexity can actually give you the outputs that you're looking for with cited sources, which makes it so much of a better research tool.
Good to know.
Yeah. How much
Because
have you used
yeah,
Perplexity, Lauren?
I don't use perplexity a
There you
lot. I think
go.
because like everyone else, seemingly have trust issues. So I like to try to double check everything and do my own research. Like anytime that, and I lean heavily on Chat GPT these days. I used to look into Claude a lot, but then I was like, about it. I have gone back and forth and back and forth between all of the models. And anytime it tries to cite anything, I automatically are like, not sure. I'm not sure I believe this is a real stat. And that's when I do go to Google.
Oh, no, but the point, Lauren, and this is maybe an educational moment for you,
Yes.
is that on Perplexity, when it cites something, it gives you the link to go to the cited source.
Right. Yeah.
So you're actually going to you're doing extra work by Googling when you could just click on the link.
Yes. Well, Perplexity probably does it more accurately because ChatGPT will cite and I'll click it and I'm like, that's not real.
Totally. No, that's the whole, like, Perplexity has been
So that's
found in many studies to be more accurate than certainly ChatGPT and even
yeah.
Google. Like, it is a
Ooh,
powerhouse of a research tool.
I love that. This is why I'm glad I'm talking to you. You learn something new every day.
You sure
And
do.
to the point I had made earlier, I definitely don't mean that HR should ask marketing how to do HR things because
Yes.
I do not ask me a
Lauren, you're
single
gonna get
thing.
a lot of questions. Lauren, you're like, "I got a performance improvement plan I need to put together.
I'm gonna be like, let
How
me
do I do
Perplexity
that?"
that for you. No, I mean it in the
Love that.
sense of if you are kind of going around the organization and crowdsourcing, like how are you using this? Like, is
Yeah.
there how should we maybe start to put some guidelines together in terms of like how are you using it, what things you are uploading to it,
Yeah.
because we have sensitive company information and don't do those things. You'll probably find a lot of the creative folks in the company have
Oh, totally.
been doing all sorts of stuff across
Early,
the
yeah.
internet.
Marketing, definitely early adopters, right? So much of
Yeah.
what you do, copywriting, now image generation,
Oh, yeah.
just the functionality that exists within these tools, Lauren, just based on what you said, I bet I could crack your mind open with some of the functionality on some of these different tools, from creating podcasts to
Oh, yeah.
videos to uh, FAQs to dashboards to everything. Like,
Oh,
there's,
yeah.
with context, it can build anything pretty
You're
much.
the AI expert here. I'm just a wee little baby.
Well, there you go.
So, speaking of which, because there is a learning curve here and people are constantly learning, and you've had all of these conversations. What is maybe the most surprising thing that someone has created using AI after telling you that they're like, I'm not techie, I can't do this?
I can't remember a time when somebody's like, well, maybe that's not true. You know, I tend to do a ton of exploring on my own.
Yeah.
And so I'm usually the person that's saying, like, did you know you could do this? I think the two things that really opened up my mind early on were, number one, I talked with a company that does the employee engagement survey analysis information. They took an 8,000 long form answer survey, meaning it had multi questions, it had multiple answers within each question. And they were able, and it had different languages, so people that responded in their
Mm.
native language, and they analyzed that survey data in under 5 minutes and categorized it, and it's explainable. That was in 2023. That was the first time I thought, and you can bleep this, I thought, "Holy shit, that's amazing." And I'm so mad that I have spent so much time of my life manually looking at survey responses and trying to categorize it, and my own bias being included, but this tool that can do this that fast. The second thing was being able to take a simple, really talk to text or vibe coding.
Mm-hmm.
Vibe coding, where I can literally just write a prompt and it builds the code for me. That I think a lot of HR leaders haven't gone from understanding what it is to how it works to the output,
Yeah.
and realizing that through a simple prompt, you can create a compensation calculator. Again, something that oftentimes you spend a ton of time putting together. You can create your weekly dashboards, over unders, terminations, retention, attrition, budget, all that stuff. That can be done so quickly now. And so I don't think it's necessarily something that somebody shared that I was like, oh, wow, like somebody in one of my classes creating something that I'd never heard of. It's more like as these innovations are becoming more, uh, as they become available, being more and more excited and more intrigued by like, what can I do today? And it feels like for the past 3 years, and this is, I think, where some of the AI fatigue comes from.
Yeah.
This like, gosh, I never feel caught up. And I tell people that say that to me, like, I don't want to, be left behind. It's like all of us are feeling that way. It's happening for all of us, whether you're in it every day like I am, or you use it a few times a month. Like it feels that way for a lot of us because it's just in constant evolution. And one of the things that part of the reason I think HR is so deeply equipped to support the adoption process and really shaping the future of work is because we experienced such massive upheaval over the past 5 years. It's
Yeah.
been COVID, it's been DEI, it's been um, rifts and reductions in force, or mass hiring, or it was just or. It's all
Mhm.
these things that have led to a much more agile HR team, HR function, a much more dynamic and responsive HR team. We had no choice. And so with AI, it sits us in a place of actually what I see as real potential for our function to say we're no longer viewed as payroll, compliance, leave. We are the architects of how business operations and how teams work together in the future. And that's going to look so different.
I love that. I was gonna ask another question, but I was like, oh wow. Just the poignancy of that. I was, oh, it feels so good. I wanted to say hell yeah at the end of that, but I also didn't want to cheapen what you said because
Yeah,
I'm bought in. I'm bought into it. I
into the
really,
breach.
yeah,
Yeah.
I really see it when I look at the last 5 years of all that HR has endured, and I think about the coming 5 years and all of these tools that are available, and the fast feedback, and the learning loops are getting shorter, and the communities are getting stronger. I really think some amazing things are going to happen.
Yeah. I think perpetually around if I were back in house today, what would I be thinking about? And I would be under an assumption that the dynamics and the way that we even employ people is gonna pretty dramatically change. I was talking to a different person, part of my cohort yesterday, and they were saying that right now they're at 1,500 employees, and their goal is to be down to 1,000 employees with technology support, not replacing roles, but having a combination of full-time employee, automation, and fractional or consulting partners. And I think that is the way of the future where like I teach university students, all of them are like, I'll work for 2 years and then I'm going to start my own business. I think there's this skill commodity that's happening right now
Mm,
where people are feeling pretty disenfranchised by corporate America for a variety of reasons over the past 5 years. And also there's been this uprising of people who are really people like myself. If you had asked me 5 years ago, "Teresa, do you think you'll, have certainly an AI company where you educate?" It would have been a sure no. And do I think I would have still been in-house? Probably yes. But circumstances have changed, and I think many of us are realizing that single source of income is is no longer a solution that we feel comfortable with. And so this like adoption of a different approach of, okay, I'm going to have multi-stream income, support where my talent is greatest used, get rid of all the bullshit, the day long, back to back to back to back meetings where nothing gets done. And I'm just going to do work that I actually am inspired and excited by.
yeah, that's the goal. That's the
Yeah,
dream.
absolutely.
Teresa, thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me, Lauren. This was just such a good Good conversation, good ideas. I love the curiosity, and curiosity is one of my values. I say it all the time, but I think there's so much happening. We're coming off of a bit of a rough world weekend, and when we think about how every HR leader I know, if they could accomplish one thing, it would be creating environments where employees can thrive and are inspired to work. I see all of this, the technology, the change in the way we work, as hopefully leading to that end. Certainly for me.
Thanks for joining us on Getting Personal, brought to you by lifestyle benefits experts at Compt. Remember, you can always find more stories and helpful insights on our LinkedIn and blog.